Okay, good morning. Hang on just a second. Let's see. I have none of my SPC students here. That's really interesting. We're going to be going over compare and contrast. So, and you've got something to do almost every day this week. Let's see. Wait, I got to get to the right week. All right. No, actually, just today, Wednesday, Thursday. Okay. And then Friday. There are a couple things to do on Friday. Let's go in and look at the course content before we do anything else. So we're on week 5. Well, what just happened there? Did everything go? That's really strange. What happened? Something really strange happened, and I don't know what. I'm in the wrong section for one thing. That would help. Okay, 208. Content, week 5. Somehow the checklist is not there. Okay. We open the syllabus. It's like something happened. Maybe there's a week I just didn't get done. That's possible for you guys. All right. Here we go. But you've got quite a few handouts. The first one we're going to look at is the one that's a PowerPoint. It'll say, it actually has the date in the corner, and it's got little squares, a little square and some information. That's an outlined form of a PowerPoint. Morning, Reed. Let's see. You're the first one. Yeah, I'm like, okay, Tuesday. Maybe I should stay home. All right. Here we go. I got to go back and put some stuff in. I'm just not sure what I did. Okay. Keep formatting. So here's what's coming up this week, now that I've got it in there. Okay. Uh-oh. Hopefully you already read the chapter. If you didn't, don't worry. What we're going to cover today basically is my version of what was in the textbook. I shortened it down. And so you've got a stack of handouts, but it's everything that's in for the week. Okay, so here's the checklist, and it tells you that this week, today we're going to have a lecture about compare and contrast, which I'm tired of talking, I'll be honest. We'll go over the topic list and we're not going to do all of the handouts, just some of them. Tomorrow you need to look at subject, verb, pronoun, antecedent agreement, and guess what? We're actually going to spend the first half of class on Wednesday going over the handout. If you use the handout, and by the way, I have it here, I sent it to facilitators yesterday. If you use this handout on the test and pay attention and highlight what I tell you to highlight, you should pass the grammar quiz, which is on Friday. So you have 2 things to do Friday. That grammar quiz over subject, verb, pronoun, grammar quiz over subject, verb, pronoun, antecedent agreement is on Friday, and you also need to turn in an outline for a compare and contrast essay. So you're going to have to be figuring out what you're going to be doing pretty quick. So that's what's coming up. So the first one I want you to look at is the PowerPoint. That's actually the syllabus. Let's see. Oh, dadgummit, forgot when no, sorry. When I had to shut down my computer, I didn't have any of my desktop show up when I turned my computer on first thing this morning, so I had to reopen everything now. So here we go. Here's the PowerPoint, and it's pretty good and quick, and then we'll be looking at the one that looks very much like a Word document, okay? But basically, writing the comparison and contrast essay. So I'm going to step back a second and say, when you're sitting around with your friends, and you think, okay, what do we want to do this week? What do we want to do tonight? It's the weekend. It's Friday night you're at football. We already know that, okay? So Saturday, what are we going to do? So you're going to say, well, do you want to go to the fair? Or would you rather go eat? We can go to the fair and eat both, but a lot of times what we do in our daily lives is we compare and contrast without really realizing that's what we're doing. Because when you look at your friend and say, hey, where do you want to go eat? And they say one place, and you go, well, I was thinking about this, and then you do the relative merits and, you know, the good points and the bad points about what you're going to eat, or where you're going to eat, or what you're going to do. Or even if you're at the fair, what rides are you going to go on first? So we compare and contrast all the time. And so that's why we're doing this paper, because it is a skill that you actually use, even though you may not be aware of it, all right? So compare and contrast. So I have to be careful, because I can write on these slides and sometimes I'll mess it up. So what is the purpose of it? The contrasts draw out the differences between two items. That's what a contrast is. The comparison then talks about the similarities between two objects. And then one of the things that a compare and contrast do is demonstrate how we're looking at the one that's got little boxes and has a 1 next to it. No. That's a PowerPoint printed as an outline, okay? And you can say which one's better. So say if I were going to compare the Galaxy Z, is that what it's called, the new Z phone? The one that's got Z Fold, okay, with the new Apple 13 Pro. I know nothing about the Apple one, but that's which one's superior. You know, that's what you're going to do when you're thinking about going out and buy it. Now, as an Apple user, I have all these apps on my phone that are Apple, so why would I switch from Apple and have to rebuy all those apps? It helps if I hold my phone up right, too. Okay, so that's part of what's going on. Once they've sucked you in, you can't get out with phones. All right? And then also, it demonstrates how two subjects which appear dissimilar are actually similar, okay? So again, we're dealing with compare and contrast. This is the slide. It's got a date on it, and it's got ones and then little squares. Look at your far left one. That's probably the one we're on. I'm trying to think. And instead of judgmental, though, you do not have to. If you're going to compare the iPhone with the Galaxy Z Fold, the new iPhone, you don't have to say which one's better, because for me, it doesn't matter which one's better. I'm going to have to go to the one I've already spent all my money on for those apps. So, but for me, it might be better to know, should I get the 13 Pro or should I just get the 13? Or should I just stick with what happened to the 12? Was there a 12? Did I just totally miss the release of 12 Apple? Or maybe that's what I have. I don't even know. That's the problem with some of us, okay? We don't even know. So how do you prepare to write one? The very first thing you have to do is brainstorm everything you know about the two subjects you're going to compare and contrast. It's really hard to do a compare and contrast if you haven't got any knowledge about the products or whatever you're going to compare and contrast, okay? So let's make sure this pencil writes. So one of the ways in which we brainstorm sometimes, I'm going to show you everybody's favorite graphic organizer. Most teachers, you know what this is? It's a Venn diagram. It's not the best pair of circles I've ever drawn, but it's a Venn diagram. And so comparing and contrasting, everything in the center intersecting area is what they share. And everything in the other two parts of the circle are what they don't share. So this is similarities. These are the differences. And what's probably going to happen on the paper that you write, you're going to focus on the differences. Because, let's be honest, you know, do we really want to talk about, when we're talking about a cell phone, do we want to talk about, well, it's got 4 sides and it's got some cameras, you know, and it's got things, or if I were to say, talk about a car, if I were going to compare and contrast, say, a Mustang with a Corvette, okay, kind of sportsters, right, cars. I'm not going to talk about the fact that they have engines, they have wheels, they have brakes, they have a windshield, right? I'm going to focus on what they don't share, okay? But I can also look at what they do share. Don't you have to pay for a car? Don't you have to pay for insurance for the car? Don't you have to put gas in it? But then all of those other things you can get are like all those extras, the add-ons. So you can see that there's ways I can talk about what they share, how what this one has in that area is much better than what this one has in that area. So you can do it, but for most of us, we're going to be looking at the differences. But you have to brainstorm. So identify the points that are relevant to both subjects. Well, you've got a case. Well, you know, you have the size. It's relative. I keep thinking I'm going to eventually end up with an iPad-sized phone because that way I won't lose it. I'll probably drop it more often, but, I guess size does matter, okay. Establish a dominant idea after examining points of similarity and difference, and that's gonna be the basis of your comparison and contrast. And select those traits to focus on based upon the dominant idea. So think of the word traits as being important. I like to call it criteria or evaluative criteria. That makes it sound fancier, doesn't it? Those are the things by which you're going to evaluate the two items. But traits will work also, or features. You know, when you're looking at something, you think about the features you get on your phone. How many cameras are there? Like, I need 3 dadgum cameras. There was no reason that I got this phone. I don't know if I've ever even used more than one, so. And be sure these traits are subject to the purpose, the desired accomplishment. So one of the things I do want to mention, though, is when you're writing compare and contrast, the two items have to share a little bit. So say if I have an orange in my hand, and in my other hand I have a washing machine. Can I write a compare and contrast paper about an orange and a washing machine? What do they have in common? They're concrete. You can touch them. But other than that, I really can't come up with a whole lot of stuff, can I? So there has to be some points of similarity between the two items. You can't just have two random things. I'm going to compare my car with a book. You know, so you can see what I'm saying, that there has to be something there. But when you write the thesis statement, you have to be careful about what you're doing. You have to decide to what extent the similarities or the differences are going to be emphasized. And then create a thesis statement that reflects what you've decided to do. So here are some weak thesis statements, and what I want you to do is take out a pen or a pencil, and I want you to draw X's on these so I don't see these in your papers, okay? That's a bad thing. They are both somewhat alike and somewhat different. That is a horrible thesis statement. So big X on that one. Oh, come on, you were writing yesterday. Gotta go back. This is what happened. Okay, I can see some differences and similarities. Why aren't you writing today? Yesterday we did a great job. Oh, pooh. Sorry, I did it again. You can see them there. So, bad thesis statements. I can see some similarities and some differences too, and both of them involve a single similarity, no differences. I don't even want you to use the term similarities and differences. That's what we do at a lower level. Okay, I think that's the less sophisticated paper. Compare and contrast is organization driven. That's what's important about it. So here are a couple of good ones, better ones. So the first one is Ralph and Jack have very different leadership styles and motivations, which leads to the eventual chaos and anarchy on the island. So this thesis statement is going to talk about two characters from a novel called The Lord of the Flies, Ralph and Jack, and it's going to talk about their leadership styles and their motivations and how those things lead to chaos and anarchy in the island. The Lord of the Flies is a very AP text. It's about a group of schoolboys from England who are on a boat, some kind of ship in World War II, and then they're stuck on an island, and they go Hunger Games on everybody, okay? You know, or the maze, whatever, you know. But they're by themselves. It's not like they're being put through it by somebody else to test them and see what they can and can't do. That one's okay, but I think you're going to like this one. Put a star next to this one. I'm frustrated that I can't write. I've lost all the abilities now. In order to make a decision between the Honda Civic and the BMW, consider the following criteria: price of the vehicle, average mileage, and price of insurance. That's a good thesis statement. It tells the reader you're going to be comparing and contrasting the Honda Civic and the BMW, and you're going to look at the criteria going to be the price of the vehicle, the average mileage, and that's miles per gallon is what's being talked about there, and the price of insurance. So off the top of your head, how many of you are thinking that the average cost of the BMW is going to be more? Should be everybody thinking that. I think the cheapest you can get a BMW, they were pushing a few years ago, or what's that, Mercedes? You could get one for like $39,000. I'm like, I could buy 2 cars. I could buy 3 cars for $39,000. None of them would be new, but yeah. So, but that's a good one, and it tells the reader what you're going to do and the order in which you're going to do it, which is awesome. Okay, so organizing it, there are 2 ways. You can use block or alternating. Block is like it sounds. Alternating is also called point by point. So the block treats all of the elements for each subject separately. And alternating treats each element or the evaluative criteria or the trait. It focuses on the traits, the other one focuses on the subjects as your bigger organizational picture. And if it's short, the block is better. If it's longer, alternating is preferable. Particularly if you are doing a test, sometimes you'll have an essay question on a test, and alternating allows you to deal with both subjects because of the way it's set up. Block, if you're sitting there writing this huge, long essay in history about the causes of World War I and World War II, and you're supposed to look at both and see what similarities and what differences there are. There's clues to words like that when you're taking a test. If you don't, you have to write fast to get both of them in. If you do alternating, you're always looking at both in every point you make. So, and you'll see more of that in a second. So, this is how it looks, and you're going to see, you actually have a graphic organizer that I gave you that's in this form of a table. So, dadgummit. Right here in this box right up here, makes me mad. In the box above BMW, that's on the same level as price and mileage and insurance, write subject, S-U-B-J-E-C-T, so you know that that's what goes in that column is the subject. Did I put that on yours, the copy I gave you guys? Is it on the box you have? I'll just go grab one real quick. But write subject in there. I was able to write on this PowerPoint yesterday. I don't have it in there, sorry.
This one right here?
On this one. Yeah, if you'll write subject on yours so that you know what should go in there. It tells you what should go in that column. I went and grabbed one so I could do it over here. So just write subject up here. So that's subject, okay? This is the form you're going to fill out for the compare and contrast outline that's due on Friday. So it's just a Word document you can go in and write. It's not a big deal. All right, so subject, and so you can see how it has. Here you have, when you go back to the PowerPoint, you've got, it tells you that the BMW is the first one, and that's the second paragraph, and the Honda Civic is the third paragraph. So this is blocked. So your introduction is the first paragraph. Then you'll have a paragraph that talks about the BMW, and you'll have a topic sentence that says, when a consumer is looking for a new car, a BMW is an excellent choice. That tells the reader that paragraph's only going to talk about a BMW, right? A first criteria to look at when buying a new car, particularly a BMW, is going to be the price. That's my second sentence. And then I talk about the median cost of a BMW is this. If I get any extras, it could go up, it's $39,000. If I get any extras, it could go up to $45,000 to $50,000. Then I'm going to transition, because you can see how those arrows move to the right. Then I transition. When purchasing a car, a buyer should also consider, when purchasing the BMW, a buyer needs to consider what are the average miles per gallon, because gas is so freaking expensive right now. It just gets more and more, the closer we get to Christmas, the more it'll be, And so you give the average miles per gallon, and you have to give what's the average miles per gallon in town, and what's the average miles per gallon on the road. And you go, and a final consideration is the cost of insurance. BMW is going to be expensive to insure, isn't it? Because it is a foreign-made car. Actually, they're both foreign, aren't they? But you do have some plants, Honda plants probably in the U.S. where you don't have any BMW. Bavarian Motor Works, right? And so that's the only thing in that paragraph you talk about is the BMW, and you look at its price, its mileage, and its insurance. The third paragraph, then you go to the Honda Civic, and you can say, my topic sentence is going to be something like another great car to consider when purchasing a car would be the Honda Civic. So I've done the same thing, but in my second sentence, the average price of a Honda Civic is significantly cheaper than a BMW. So there's my contrast right there. I'm contrasting the Honda Civic to the BMW. I didn't mention the Honda Civic in the paragraph about the BMW because I have no information on it. But once I've done that paragraph, then I can contrast the Honda Civic with the BMW in the Honda Civic paragraph. So I take it through price. I take it through, it's going to be cheaper. A Honda Civic's going to cost blah, 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 blah. If you add on, the most it's going to be the $33,000. It's still cheaper with all the good stuff versus the BMW. When it comes to miles per gallon, the Honda Civic and the BMW are comparable. I'm just making this up. up. I'm writing an essay without knowledge right now. But then I say what it is, and then the cost of insurance on a Honda Civic is going to be cheaper. Yes, it is a foreign car, but it is more readily accessible to the average person. More mechanics will have stuff going on, okay? So that's how you do it. So you can talk about the first item in the second paragraph by saying, in comparison to that, this is much cheaper. So that's how you do block. This is how it looks. Oh, I went backwards. Sorry, my bad. Come on, let's go. Come on. All right. Now we're going to look at what it looks like if you do it as an outline. So you have the introduction, and then the introduction, you have a hook, some kind of thing to get you into it. You can get some background information, and then a thesis. And by the way, first person, I should not be in this. I know this is your opinion. You don't have to tell me. You don't use that. You don't talk about the essay. And you don't use you or your. You're not writing instructions on somebody to how to buy a car. But the last sentence in your introduction is going to be the thesis. So that's paragraph 1. So that's what the Roman numerals stand for. Paragraph 2 is about the BMW. Then it looks at price, mileage, and insurance. Paragraph 3 is the Honda Civic. You look at price, mileage, and insurance. And then you have your conclusion, which is emphasize the major ties. You know, yes, they're both good cars for the value of the money. And then, so what? Which one's going to be better for you? And you don't have to make that choice. You can always leave it up. The consumer ultimately is the one who will decide the car they want. You can say something along those lines. Or the phone, or the house, or whatever. So now, let's talk about alternating. Remember how when I showed you the graphic for the block method, it was going horizontally? Vertical is driven differently. It goes vertically. So, again, the subject's BMW and the Honda Civic, but instead of only talking about the BMW in the second paragraph, the topic sentence, let's see, it's not going to let me write. I keep trying. I don't know what I've done to this dadgum program, but I've done something wrong. Okay. The topic sentence on alternating is only going to mention the evaluative criteria, the feature, the trait that you're going to evaluate on. It's important when deciding to buy a new car for the consumer to look at the overall price of the car. If a consumer is interested in a BMW, then I don't introduce the two subjects until after I've introduced the criteria, because it's driven by the criteria. That's alternating, or point by point. BMW, I talk about, and then after I get done with that, and the nice thing about doing alternating is in the same paragraph, you see the average cost of the BMW is this, you add on it's this. Unlike the BMW, a Honda Civic's average price is, see how they're all in the same paragraph, so you, as a reader, you get the immediacy of the comparison. You don't have to go back and make sure that they got the facts from the second paragraph right. That's why alternating is better in one sense. And then, third paragraph is going to talk about mileage. With the average cost of gasoline in the United States being over $3 a gallon, that's an important consideration. What are you going to get? The average mileage of a car. For a BMW, the average mileage in town is going to be this. The average mileage on the road is going to be this. The Honda Civic, like the BMW, gets pretty good mileage. I'm just making guesses. They probably both get good mileage. And so that's what you do. So you're focused. When you write an alternating, what you get is a 5-paragraph essay. When you write the block, you only get 4 paragraphs. Okay? So when you're doing the outline, the alternating looks a little bit different. Paragraph 1 is the introduction, and that's the same. You're going to see the introduction and the conclusion are the same. There's no difference. Here it focuses, see how it says price? It doesn't say the price of a Honda Civic and a BMW are important. No, just say the price of a car when you buy it is important. Depends on how much you got, how much money you have a month to pay for it, right? So BMW, then the Honda Civic. Now you've got mileage, BMW, Honda Civic, and then insurance, BMW, Honda Civic. See how it's always following the same order? What bugs me is that their thesis statement listed the Honda Civic first and then the BMW. That's a lack of consistency in this particular PowerPoint. It's not one I've created, it's one I found. And the conclusion then is the same. Emphasize major ties, so what? Evaluate, and the clincher. So what are the rules of thumb with comparison and contrast essays? You have to discuss both subjects equally in terms of coverage. You can't have one itty-bitty paragraph about baseball and one huge paragraph about soccer or football, whatever you're writing about. Sorry, Austin, that stuck in my mind, okay? You have to be sure to discuss the same elements for each subject. Do not discuss one element for one and not do so for the other. So you can't say, I'm gonna talk about the cost of the BMW and never talk about the cost of the Honda. You have to deal with them equally and the same. You can't have criteria and not look at both. Even if you have to say, if I were gonna say, talk about a phone, I would have, and it doesn't have any apps that go with it. You have to say, when it comes to extras like apps, this phone really doesn't offer that many because it's basically just a burner phone, you know, whatever. You have to at least say something that tells you looked at that criteria. And you have to decide upon block or alternating arrangement. You do not get to mix. That doesn't mean you can write the block and you talk about your 3 criteria. And so you do the BMW and then you do the Honda Civic. And then you have a third body paragraph where you talk about their similarities. You don't do that. You can't mix. If you're doing block, you're only gonna have 4 paragraphs. If you're doing alternating, you're gonna have 5. Now, if you write a really long, if you have a lot of information, you might have more than 5 paragraphs or 4 paragraphs. But I'm not expecting that, okay? And then the last is have a clear purpose to achieve in the compare and contrast. So this is a great PowerPoint because it tells you about indicators. It tells whether you're comparing or contrasting the words you use, okay? I just summarized all that in about 3 words, didn't I? So here are some. To compare, you have also, as, in the same way, like, likewise, similarly, comparable, equally, in addition. I find the contrasting ones are basically subordinating conjunctions or conjunctive adverbs. Although, but, even though, well, we actually, however, on the other hand, otherwise, yet, still, conversely, as opposed to, and the last one is whereas. So you get a list of ones to use. And so instead of saying, instead of saying unlike the BMW, you can say, whereas the Honda Civic, see how that serves the same purpose. Okay, and that's the PowerPoint. So, let's look at the one that's a Word document. I'm gonna have to open that up. Nope. That shutdown messed me up. This is the one that is the summary, basically, of the chapter. Okay. And it has a lot of the same things. You're going to keep hearing alternating and block. You're going to keep hearing a lot of things. It looks like it says comparison and contrast, and it's centered very much a Word document, okay? Looks like this, Reed. It is what it is. Today's the 28th, right? Okay. All right. And that's what it says. The comparison and contrast shows how 2 or more things are similar, and contrast shows how they're different. And they use the terminology. They don't have analogies on the SAT anymore, do they? Anybody take the SAT?
What is it?
The analogies, where you have to say green is to blue as car is to wheel. And you have to determine what the nature, no, they don't have them anymore. That's because that's hard, doing analogies. One of the ways, though, for humans to make sense of our world is to put data or data side by side and compare it, see what is similar and what is different. So, because we do it all the time, it's how we decide, you know, do I want to buy this stroller or that stroller? Do I want to read this book or that book, okay? Do I want to watch this show or that show? But those are some key words when you're taking a test that might help you out, that compare and contrast, similarities and differences, relative merits, advantages and disadvantages. So watch for that. So when you evaluate, you frequently use C&C. Courses, cars, healthcare options, instructors. Any of you go to rate your instructor to see what people are rated? It's not a bad thing to do. You just have to remember, most of the time, they only rate people they don't like. I'm just going to tell you, because they made you mad because you didn't get a good grade. So that's going to be in there, so. Okay, let's see. A basis for comparison must exist, so that's the orange in the washing machine. And a comparison should lead beyond the obvious. That's why we don't talk about the wheels on a car or the engine, unless you're talking about the Mustang and the Corvette. Corvette's engine's probably going to be more powerful than a Mustang's, I would think, right? So points for discussion. A lot of this we've just gone over. After deciding what subjects to compare and contrast, you need to select the points you want to discuss. And you have to figure out if you're going to look at their similarities or their differences. So the thesis statement should tell your readers what to expect in your essay, identifying not only the subjects, but also the points you're going to make about them. And it should highlight the essay's central concern by presenting it in the independent rather than the dependent clause. I'm sure that means a lot to you guys. Independent clause can stand on its own as a sentence, dependent clause can't. All right, so here's a block comparison using Star Wars and Star Trek. This is this is my part of this, okay? So your introduction, this is how I would do a block on Star Wars and Star Trek. Many people think Star Wars and Star Trek are the same story because they take place in outer space, right? But comparing and contrasting the two series shows how both have different views of the future past. That's kind of a vague thing, so I'm going to, if I write this paper, my whole point is going to be to show how they have different views about what's going to happen out in space. So Star Wars, I'm going to talk about setting, characters, and conflict, and Star Trek, setting, characters, and conflict. And so the conclusion would be a restatement of the thesis or review of key points in the different future past revealed. So I'm getting there. Now alternating, I came up with a different thesis statement. You could use, if you want to write Star Wars versus Star Trek, please feel free to. It's not a problem. I've given you 2 organizational methods and 2 different theses so you can use. Though although Star Trek and Star Wars are both series about humankind and its expansion into outer space, the settings, the characters, and the conflict show the greater complexity of the Star Wars universe. Now, I'm just going to tell you that that is written with the original Star Trek TV show as the focus, okay? I'm just telling you. Because Star Trek has now become more sophisticated with Abrams getting involved in it. And they're actually rewritten history, so, okay? But on this one, the organizations, we're going to talk about the setting. What's the setting in Star Trek? For one thing, setting involves time. Star Trek is in the future. Star Wars is a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. So see how you've got the setting, they're totally different, okay? The characters, you talk about your main characters in Star Trek, and then you talk about the characters in Star Wars. And, you have your captains. That's one of those given things, like Han Solo and Kirk, those kind of things. And you kind of have to restrict yourself because they both have evolved into much bigger stories, haven't they? And then the conflicts. Star Trek, you've got the Romulans, you've got the Borg, you've got the Klingons, and then Star Wars you have the Empire, and you have the, what's the new group? I can't remember their name. The what? No, the Resistance is the opponent, but the, what all, yeah, it just hasn't stuck with me. I can remember that. But your conclusion is the restatement of the thesis. So I've actually given you this paper. And one of my students looked at me yesterday and said, "Can I do Marvel and DC?" I said, "You sure can." You could look at the exact same thing with Marvel and DC. If you're into comics, or graphic novels, graphic stories. Comics makes it sound like you're reading little things for, little kiddo stuff, like Betty. I want to say Archie comics, but Riverdale has taken that in a whole different direction. So I watched parts of the first season. I was like, this is not Archie and Betty and Veronica and Jughead that I know. This is something much more adult. So, and basically there's that one. So now for your viewing pleasure, we're going to see a video by my favorite Canadian instructor. All of this is in your unit, okay? It's contained in week 5, which I've got to clean up. I can't believe that. Come on, YouTube. Slowly loading. As I got set to leave my house this morning, the kitten decided it was hungry again. I had to stop and feed the kitten. I smell like...
Grammarly helps make your writing clear and concise, no matter where you are. Compose a cover letter that...
There we go.
One of the most common types of academic essay you'll have to write is the comparison contrast essay, where you'll be asked to talk about the similarities and differences of 2 subjects. Now, it probably won't be as easy as comparing 2 cities. You'll probably have to compare something like 2 theories or 2 characters in 2 totally different novels. The most important thing to remember with comparison is to avoid the obvious. If you have 2 subjects that are very similar, of course, it's easy to focus on similarities, but it's probably more interesting to try to focus on the differences. Now, before we talk about the essay structure, it's important to mention that you should probably watch the video on basic essay structure first, okay? So the comparison contrast essay introduction is basically the same as the other essays we've discussed. The hook will engage the reader and introduce both subjects, which is very important. The background will give any essential information that the reader needs to understand the main point of the essay. And then the thesis statement will focus the comparison for the reader. Now, I'll mention something about thesis statements in a moment. The main difference between the comparison contrast essay and the other essays that we've discussed is that you have options with this kind of essay. There are really two different options that you can choose from. The first one is what we call the block method, which means you have two body paragraphs that are organized in this fashion. You can have a similarities differences essay, which means you have one paragraph that is entirely focused on the similarities between the two subjects, and one paragraph that is entirely focused on the differences between the two subjects, making sure that each paragraph has a clear topic sentence. Another form of the block essay is what you might call a subject-to-subject essay, which in one paragraph gives all the information about one subject. In the next paragraph, it focuses entirely on subject B. Okay, so that's one option. The second option, and in my opinion, the slightly more interesting of the two, is what we call the point-by-point comparison contrast essay, where instead of focusing only on similarities and differences, you choose two or more points of comparison. Now, if, for example, you were comparing two restaurants, certain points that you could use to compare them would be atmosphere, menu, service, and so on. So in the point-by-point body, each paragraph focuses on one point, either with the similarities or the differences. So for example, in that essay about restaurants, paragraph 1 would focus entirely on the atmosphere of both restaurants. Paragraph 2 could focus entirely on the service at both of those restaurants and how they are similar or different. After you've done that, of course, you have your conclusion, which is the same as pretty much all essays that we've talked about. You want to summarize your main points, and you want to end with a final statement to leave the reader with a lasting impression, perhaps a final opinion. Now, the most important part to keep in mind about the point-by-point essay is that whatever points you're discussing in your body have to be mentioned in the thesis statement. Now, with the block method, the thesis statement could be slightly more general, but if I were to write an essay about the restaurants and my points were atmosphere and service, I have to make sure to include the words atmosphere and service in my thesis statement.
So you now heard everything 3 times about that. So now I don't want to see similarities and differences, okay? Let me see here. I was checking my email on my phone while I was, because it dings so much. All right, let's go down small. We're not going to, you've got the big PDF that's from another university. That's a really good example. You also have some corrections to that on that PDF because there are things about it I don't like. What I want to look at right now is let's talk about possible topics. And he brought up an interesting one in there. He said you could talk about, you could compare and contrast 2 restaurants. Hey, that's a pretty good deal. My college instructor said I could go out and eat at 2 different places. No, don't tell you know. I would prefer that you not write a paper comparing Chick-fil-A and McDonald's, okay? Somebody said, what about Chick-fil-A and Cane's? I said, I guess so. But you could do that. You have my permission to do that. But are you really going to talk about the atmosphere inside Cane's and the atmosphere inside Chick-fil-A? That's not going to be one of the criteria. They're the same. Fast food restaurants are pretty, you know, McDonald's might have a playground, but you guys are too big to play on it, right? But you might take, if you got little kids, you could take them there, you know. But the point is, you can't do atmosphere if you're gonna talk about a fast food restaurant. If you're gonna talk about going to Las Brisas versus Kegel's, there's some atmosphere at those two places. So you'd have to consider what the categories are gonna be. Let me open up that. And the top, let's see. Oh, one other thing that I have in there for you guys is I also have a good compare and contrast essay. It's in the unit. Here's a possible topic list. This is not all-inclusive. You can write off of this list, but I am going to tell you some of these that I don't want you to do because they're too simplistic. They're just not, they're like what you would give to an elementary student. If I'm going to tell you to compare red and black, the colors, that's too simplistic, okay? We can't do that. We have to do something a little bit more. But what happened was I found a bunch of different lists for compare and contrast, and I put them all in a single document, okay? So here it is. So the very first one is Apple versus Microsoft. Aren't they, Or would it be better to say Apple versus IBM? Or Apple versus PC? You know, see how or Mac versus PC. That might be the better way to go, is Mac versus PC, okay? And the problem is if you're going to compare the two companies, then you have to look at their product lines. You know, there's a lot of things to go about. I had somebody that, by trying to do the companies, it was too much. If you just want to compare a Mac laptop with a PC laptop, that might be an easier deal to work with. But speaking of which, that's my issue, is I've got a message about how they're having trouble getting MS365 on the Macs to work well, to give them Word. They're having issues with that at Lubbock Cooper right now. So I've got to get them names for people to talk to. Coke versus Pepsi. Well, guess what? Don't even bother writing it because this is what I drink. So I hate going into a place and they say, oh, we have Pepsi. I don't want Pepsi. You have got root beer? Got lemonade? So I'm just a confirmed, Coke caffeine addict, all right? If anybody's taking art appreciation, maybe you could do this for extra credit in that class and turn it in as an essay for me. Renaissance art versus Baroque art, because if it ain't Baroque, you don't have to fix it. Okay, bad dad joke, all right? Antebellum era versus Reconstruction era in American history. Antebellum is pre-Civil War. Reconstruction is post-Civil War. Why do you think Lady Antebellum changed her name to Lady A? Because that's a negative term. Childhood versus adulthood. I'm going to be honest, most of you can't write this. Rodney, you're about the only one I would allow to write this essay because of your age. If you're 18 and 19, you're just not enough of an adult. You're still in school, right? Well, back in school. There's a difference. You've got those 14 years that they don't have. So there's always somebody who wants to talk about how childhood and adulthood, and they're writing at the age of 16. And it's just hard. You're missing some life in there. Star Wars versus Star Trek. Ooh, isn't that interesting? Biology versus chemistry. Who would want to write that? I don't know. But you could write it if you want to. Astrology versus astronomy is not a bad topic, but you need to know what exactly astrology is, and you need to know exactly what astronomy is. So if you're into that, astrology is your life is governed by the stars. What's your horoscope? It's the horoscope thing is what astrology is basically. Do you know what your sign of the zodiac is? I do. I know what mine is. I don't know what yours are, but okay. And astronomy is the actual study of the movement of the stars. Speaking of which, I have an app on my phone that is called Star Rover. So I can go outside at night and it tells me what are the planets that are out and what constellations are being shown. It's kind of cool. I like that. The American government versus the British government. If you're taking government, that would be an option. It would help you with it. Guess what? You can't do fruits versus vegetables. Okay, I don't really want to read about oranges and apples and lemons and cauliflower and leeks and things. I really don't want to read that one, so that's a no, okay? Ego versus superego. I had a student do this. They were taking psychology, and they were very intrigued by the ego and the superego. But you need to know, can you get 600 words? Because guess what? You just increased the length of the paper 20%. It's 600 words on this one. Because you've got to do more than you had to do in the narrative, okay? So you would really have to know what's going on between the ego, the superego. I think they had to, actually have the ego, superego, and the id, so they had to do that. Christianity versus Judaism or any world religion. Religion, I cannot speak English right now. Most of us are familiar with Christianity. You need to know something about, you'd have to do some research. And knowing about Jews from the Old Testament doesn't count as the right kind of research, okay? Yes, they had to do a lot of things. They sacrificed a lot of animals. There were more dead animals in the Old Testament. Whew. Oh, gosh. Republican versus Democrat. This was applicable more last year when we were going through a political election. But I am so tired of politics right now. I think they're all crooks. They're all not the greatest people in the world. I'm going to be honest, so. You know, anybody that can make sure that we all have crappy health insurance, that they've got one for the rest of their lives, that's not very fair, is it? There was a political cartoon, I think in yesterday, and it goes, why can't we put limits on how much, basically it's something about putting limits on what our politicians get paid. You know, like they're putting limits on other stuff. The monarchy versus the presidency. Okay. And U.S. president versus UK prime minister. Because really the monarchy has nothing. They're nothing. They're just kind of figureheads, you know. So I don't know if that's a viable paper, but the president versus the prime minister would work. Jazz versus classical music. If you're in music appreciation, you could look at two different forms. Or if you are a music enthusiast and you know enough about different genres, you can compare them. So you would have to look at artists. You might have to look at, I got a good paper this summer over music from one of my students, so. Soccer versus football. Shoot, I could write that one. And I've read that one many times. And there's nothing wrong with it. If you like, I actually enjoy watching soccer, not American men because they're not very good. I like the American women better, but they didn't have their best year either. And football, good God, could there have been more upsets in football this past weekend? The Chiefs and the Bucks losing? Sheesh. Okay. But, you know, you look at equipment, you look at field, you look at rules, there's a lot of things you can look at with that. I had somebody try to compare and contrast the types of people who played the game. That's really tough. Because there are a lot of soccer players who end up kicking on professional football teams or college football teams. New England colonies versus middle colonies or southern colonies. Y'all could get Mr. Hunt to help you out with that, couldn't you? Over there at Health Center, okay? Cash versus credit cards. That's a good one. That appeals to a lot of people. What are the advantages? You could think of the advantages. You have cash and credit cards. I'm thinking credit cards, debt. Yeah, I have my share of credit card debt. Oh, yeah. Okay. If you're into Lord of the Rings, it's Sam Gamgee versus Frodo Baggins. Just as a clue, it's two characters. They're very similar, yet they're very different. You'd have to know the stories. Most of you probably know who the second guy is, Dumbledore, you know, the headmaster at Hogwarts, whereas Gandalf is the wizard from the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit. And by the way, I know both of those stories really well, so be careful if what you're going to do. Don't think you can sneak something past me, because you cannot. Fred versus Shaggy, come on, Scooby-Doo, right? That might be a fun paper to write, because we all know what Shaggy is. Shaggy's a pothead, isn't he? So, yeah. And he was a pothead in the 60s and when he first came out, so that's nothing new. Rap versus pop, you know, and the problem with that, with doing the music genres is when you're talking about rap versus pop, there's a lot of crossover artists that, you know, you now have rap and country music, you have rap and popular music, so, you know, you'd have to really differentiate between the two. So you have to be careful when you're talking about contemporary music. Here, yeah, I know you're going to jump on this one. The Articles of Confederation versus the U.S. Constitution. Oh, that's not happening. Stocks versus bonds. We've got communism versus capitalism, socialism versus capitalism. You can't do mammals versus reptiles. That's just writing Jurassic Park for me. Okay. Oven versus microwave. One of the worst papers I ever got was on oven versus microwave. The kid had not paid any attention whatsoever to organization, and it just wandered around. Greek versus Roman mythology. There's a lot in here. Renting versus owning. Online versus traditional education. You guys have all had to deal with online education. Let's talk March of 2020. We all went to online education, didn't we? We didn't have a choice. So, traditional education. It's been shown that traditional education, you'll learn more, I'll just tell you. The North versus the South Pole, well, they have snow and ice. Creatures are a little different. Watercolor versus oil. Here it's comparing two books, 1984 and Fahrenheit 451. And yesterday, there was something in there that said, well, we're reliving one of my friends from church posted, he was rereading 1984, he goes, who would know that they got it right? Two poets, Emily Dickinson and Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Nobody's jumping on that one, I know. Helicopters versus airplanes. Hitler versus Napoleon. If you like war and you like dictators. Roman Empire versus British Empire. Paper versus plastic. You could do it. Italy versus Spain sounds like a bad soccer match. Baseball versus cricket or softball. Don't write about cricket if you don't know anything about it. Softball is a better one because there are similarities. You can play them on the same field. I like Jefferson versus Adams, but I prefer Hamilton versus Burr. Come on. You haven't seen Hamilton? At least you could have seen it on TV. Okay, thoroughbreds versus Clydesdales. I did have somebody compare a couple of different breeds of sheep one time. That was interesting. Spiders versus scorpions sounds like West Side Story, and you've got a couple of rival gangs. That would be the Jets and the Sharks. The Northern Hemisphere versus the Southern Hemisphere, I think that's too big of a topic. You need to know philosophers with Hobbes versus Locke. You'd have to be into LD. Friends versus family. Oh, I'm going to do that, you're going to think. That's a lot harder topics than you think because they're so dadgum similar. Friends are always there for you. So is your family. Friends don't live with you. Guess what? Yeah, they do sometimes. Modern dance versus ballroom dancing. American Idol